there signaling John Lewis's goodbye. Nancy?
And Nora, that was a really striking moment. We don't get a lot of double rainbows here in Washington, D.C., and that's why it got so much attention. At the exact moment that it happened, it hadn't been raining in the District of Columbia, and yet there it was. Speaker Pelosi saying today that it was almost as if John Lewis himself were sending a message saying goodbye to his longtime colleagues, and she said today, as she has in the past few days, that he was always on the side of angels, and now he is one. It was really a striking moment to see that double rainbow, especially here in the nation's capital.
Nancy Cordes on Capitol Hill. I want to also bring in CBS News political correspondent Ed O'Keefe, who watched along with us, and Ed, this was one of the most powerful events I've ever witnessed, let alone a memorial and some of the speeches in tribute to not only John Lewis's incredible legacy, but also
back from Republicans. There are two competitive Senate races in that state. One of them actually involves Reverend Warnock. He is running for the Senate as a Democrat against the sitting Republican Senator Kelly Loeffler. And so this was quite a platform for him to have today. Lewis himself actually wrote in his memoir about how many back in the day believed in Atlanta that ministers should stay out of electoral politics and not necessarily campaign for office themselves, but should instead keep to the pulpit. Warnock of a different generation and is going to do it. And I am also struck by the fact that this great city of the South is paying tribute to a man who adopted it as his hometown. Remember, he's from Troy, Alabama, the boy from Troy. He moved to Atlanta because of his civil rights work with Dr. King, and wrote in his memoirs about how he spent most of the 1970s trying to convince people there to vote for him. He had encouraged his friends Andrew Young and Julian Bond, who later became rivals of him, to run for office. Young did, Bond didn't at the time. Lewis ran unsuccessfully for Congress in the late 1970s, falling short because he realized he wasn't enough of a name yet. Worked for Jimmy Carter and his administration, but had differences with the former president, and then ended up on the city council, and actually took a very unpopular stand by voting against building the Carter Center there in Atlanta where it was built, because he was concerned it was going to transform a neighborhood for the worst, and actually got calls from the former president asking him to support it, and he refused to do so, and he suffered politically for it. And then ran for Congress in 1986 against his former friend Julian Bond, who later ran the NAACP, of course, a civil rights activist and leader in his own regard. And he writes in his book how he said, "My beat-up blue Nikes gave out that first week of the election. I went through 2 more pairs before it was over, jogging from door to door, neighborhood after neighborhood." And he said, "I was literally running from dawn to dawn." He won that race in 1986 and served in Congress ever since, and today gets a fitting tribute from his adopted hometown.
well said, and a great piece of history there in that particular race. Ed, thank you for giving that all context. I want to bring back in Michelle Miller. We should also note this was a lesson in civil rights history because we heard from Reverend Lawson, who was the one who preached and taught all of them the values of nonviolent protest, what to do. There's footage from back in the 60s about how to do that. We heard, and he's in his late 80s, we heard from Zernona Clayton, who turns 90, who introduced John Lewis to his wife, Lillian. And, you know, the personal side of this, saying she didn't understand what he meant by good trouble, but good trouble meant to right the wrongs of society, and he did a pretty decent job of that. But she said also, be kind.
Be kind. I want to hit for a moment just this idea of the Voting Rights Act, because that was so deeply personal to him. It was such a part of his DNA without him even knowing about it until late in life. But you have to recall that his great-great-grandfather, who was an enslaved American, the minute the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment were passed, he went out to register to vote. Keep in mind what is taking place today, in the words of Barack Obama. The same vestiges of what Barack Obama talked about, suppressing the vote after Reconstruction occurred back then. And so that he, the great-grandfather, this ancestor of John Lewis, was among the more than 180,000 registered black men in the state of Alabama. And that by 1901,